I am the disease and I am the cure. That was my line, he changed it. He was joking. Joke's on you.
DZ, where you going?
I'll be back.
Brian Thompson is a name you may not know, but you may recognise his face. Brian Thompson has been in a variety of different genre movies, and actually, I'm actually quite a fan of him. He was in Front Night 2, which is one of my favourite movies. He's been in Cobra, as kind of the bad guy against Stallone. He's been in small parts in things like The Terminator, and you may have seen him in the X-Files TV show, the Mortal Kombat Annihilation movie, loads of stuff. He normally plays a bad guy and has been described as a cut-price Arnold Schwarzenegger. And here he is in a movie called The Extendables, also known as Action Hero, where he directs, produces, edits and stars in a kind of satire of the kind of the action hero Hollywood machine. So Brian Thompson plays a character in The Extendables called VD, which is short for a kind of foreign name, I can't remember, to be honest. They're obviously a take on kind of Schwarzenegger or Van Damme. And here he is, a kind of a diva-like action hero who essentially acts up on set, kind of trying to be taking over and essentially acting like a bit of an a-hole. Where we have a kind of peek behind the curtain of, in his own words, Brian Thompson's, his experiences, what it's been like working with kind of said action stars. VD, the character, is an amalgamation of Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme, among others. And the movie actually has an intro by Brian Thompson, just as himself, really kind of setting up and telling you this is kind of why he's made the movie, and essentially saying he's worked with all these kind of big stars, and this kind of character is an amalgamation of all of them, and this movie is based on the experience that he has had working with all those stars. The actual plot of the film itself, so it focuses on a set of a low-budget kind of science fiction movie, which is being filmed in Europe somewhere. Brian Thompson, of course, playing a VDR action star who essentially acts like a diva, not really knowing what he's doing, keep kind of like having silly ideas that he kind of wants to insert into the story, acting like a bit of an arsehole to the kind of the staff and crew, cast and crew, being sexually kind of like aggressive to kind of certain female members of staff, etc., etc. And that's essentially the entire movie, and it's how the people around him essentially act to him. This is not an Expendables spoof, despite the name and the cover here. This is really a kind of like a sort of satire on the behind-the-scenes look at kind of what apparently, according to Brian Thompson at least, these action stars are like to work with. So first of all, what works? I feel this movie has a good idea if it were a short. If it were a vignette in a segment of a kind of Saturday Night Live or something along the lines of that, because I certainly do feel there are probably comedy kind of like nuggets to kind of mine here. And we've all heard stories about, you know, what kind of actors kind of are liked on set and kind of the silly demands that they've kind of made and stuff like this. I don't think this really comes as a surprise to anyone. And the idea here of exploring a movie, a whole movie on it, I feel may have been good for part of a film, but maybe not a whole film. There are a couple of things to enjoy. I've got to say, I quite like some of the kind of the smaller winks that we have in the kind of film industry. For example, the character VD, played by Brian Thompson, has a co-star who is a more established but kind of like forgotten about elderly thespian, and trying to kind of like relive his kind of like more kind of glory days, so to speak, and that's kind of true. You'll be reminded of Alec Guinness in kind of Star Wars and things like this. There are a couple of kind of amusing moments here, mildly kind of diverting moments, and you know, Brian Thompson is certainly an interesting character to watch. But I've got to say, I am struggling to kind of find things good to say about this movie. I think the idea works, as I've mentioned, if it were a short. If it were like a, maybe no more than a 10-minute kind of YouTube video or a segment in a kind of a variety kind of comedy show. but it's a movie that one joke is dragged out far too long, and therefore ultimately becomes unfunny and really kind of quite boring, if I'm honest. Some of the jokes here just are all kind of a variation of the same thing. You know, VD, this character VD is a diva, and we have lots of examples of him doing like diva-like stuff and kind of acting like, you know, just a kind of like essentially a bit of an asshole. But there's only so many times you can kind of see the same joke done a few different times, and it becomes tiresome real quick. And the kind of the dick jokes and stuff like that just aren't particularly funny, unfortunately. There's so little plot in this movie. It's an extended skit that it lasts for a feature-length movie. Now, I quite like Brian Thompson, but I do feel that he has probably done himself... I mean, this was a 2014 movie, but this probably hasn't done him any favours, if I'm honest, because obviously, essentially, he is, you know, earmarking these kind of like these bigger stars and really kind of like trying to tear strips off them. Now, I doubt many people have seen this movie, so maybe it won't be a problem for him, but, you know, I recently reviewed a Bigfoot movie with Brian Thompson in it recently, but he's not really worked all that much, and I can't help but maybe feel his distaste for the industry and the people in it. It probably hasn't helped, and it's a shame because I've always quite enjoyed his work. But this movie is a real slog to sit through. Like I've said, the joke would have been funny for 5 minutes, but it really isn't stretched over a whole feature-length movie. I mean, it's hard to kind of like talk much about it. There's nothing to this film. There's no real plot. It's just a kind of like almost like an experience. You can imagine him having this conversation about what it's like to work with these kind of people, and it'd be pretty interesting. But watching a kind of a film and having kind of like these probably quite mundane events happening, kind of like they've been souped up and spoofed up to just a kind of a very kind of low budget cheesy degree. It's just not an interesting movie to watch, unfortunately. So, despite there being maybe a little bit of kind of interest in some of these stories, and you have a few kind of like cameos from, you know, quasi-famous people, Mark Dacascos, Kevin Sorbo, Martin Coe, for example, all of them blink and you'll miss some cameos. The film is really pretty uninteresting, which is a shame because I do enjoy Brian Thompson's work, if I'm honest, and kind of maybe he feels very disillusioned by the business, one would imagine. I really can't recommend this one, sadly to say, though. So 3 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.